Welcome back, Deep Divers. Today we're diving headfirst into the journey to transform culture. And no, it's not your typical dry business book.
Not at all. Stephen W. Jones really gets into it. We're talking human behavior, the nitty-gritty of what makes cultures tick.
And not just in companies, right?
Right. It's families, it's communities, it's even global stuff. The book's got this surprising reach.
And before we forget, Jones himself is a huge part of what makes this book so compelling. I mean, we're talking about a guy who's stared death in the face, turned around multi-million-dollar companies.
Talk about life experience.
Yeah.
But it's how he ties those experiences into his whole approach to leadership and cultural change,
Right.
Like growing up surrounded by totally different political views. That's got to teach you a thing or two about navigating conflict.
Oh, for sure. Finding that common ground. So he's got the diplomacy angle down. What else?
His Air Force days, right? That's where he got this deep respect for clear communication. Like, he talks about how even a tiny miscommunication can snowball into something huge, especially in high-pressure situations.
Which, let's be real, describes a lot of workplaces these days.
Totally. But where it gets really interesting is his track record of saving failing businesses. Like, he had this knack for zeroing in on the root cause of a problem, the stuff everyone else missed.
And often that root cause wasn't even about strategy or money.
It was the company culture. Spot on.
So how does he connect all of that to this idea of cultural transformation being important for, well, everyone?
He makes the case that we're living in this crazy time of nonstop change, right? Tech is going wild, everything's interconnected. And to deal with it all, we need a total mindset shift, like how we think, how we act, how we treat each other and the world around us.
Okay, that's a pretty big claim. But something tells me he can back it up. So let's get down to it. What exactly does he mean by cultural transformation, and why should we even care?
He's not talking about some surface-level makeover here. It's a fundamental change. And the reason we should care. It's not just about businesses thriving. It's about us thriving as people, as communities, as a whole society, really.
So Jones says we need this big cultural transformation. Makes sense. But where do we even begin? Like, what are the building blocks of this new and improved culture he's talking about?
Well, this is where it gets really interesting, maybe even a little unexpected. Jones thinks that love, yeah, you heard that right, love is the most powerful engine for positive change.
Love. I gotta admit, that's not the first thing that pops into my head when I hear cultural transformation. Sounds a little, soft.
I get it. But he's not talking about love in some cheesy Hallmark movie kind of way. It's about love as a leadership principle, like this deep down commitment to your team's well-being, your family's well-being.
Okay, so less about saying, I love your work, and more about creating a culture where people feel valued.
Exactly. And it goes deeper than that. Jones talks about the consequences of what he calls a lack of love in cultures. Things like codependency, fear-based decisions, unhealthy boundaries.
Yeah, all that messy stuff.
Right. And he argues that these dysfunctions, they come from a place of scarcity. Like, people are operating from this fear of not having enough.
Which, when you think about it, makes a lot of sense. When we feel insecure, we're more likely to step on people to get ahead.
Right.
Or hold ourselves back out of fear.
Exactly. And over time, those behaviors create a toxic environment. They stifle creativity, innovation, real connection. But Jones believes that by shifting our mindset from that scarcity to abundance, from fear to love, we can actually break those negative cycles.
So we can create a more positive, fulfilling, and ultimately more successful way of being. I like it. But how do we actually put this love as a leadership principle into practice? It still feels kind of abstract,
Great question. And luckily, Jones doesn't just leave us hanging with these big, lofty ideas. He gets into some really practical tools and strategies.
Okay, so let's get into it. What are some actionable takeaways our listeners can start using right now? So we're trying to transform cultures with love, huh? Leading with empathy, building trust. Sounds amazing on paper, but how do we actually make it happen? Come on, Jones, give us the tools.
Oh, he does. One of the coolest things he talks about is this great reset. It's like hitting the refresh button. You let go of all that old baggage, all those past hurts, and you just approach things with a clean slate.
Okay, I like it. Mental decluttering. But how do you actually do that? Especially if you've been stuck in a negative cycle for a while, it feels kind of monumental.
It all starts with awareness.
Right.
Right. You got to see those old patterns, those ingrained habits, and make a conscious choice to interrupt them. And to help with that, Jones talks about these things called scoreboards. Basically, they're visual tools to track your progress.
So instead of dwelling on what's not working, you create this visual reminder of what is working.
Exactly. Celebrate those wins no matter how small. And it helps create this sense of shared accountability, too.
I can see how that would be super motivating, especially when you're working on a team.
Totally. It shifts the focus from blame to progress. And speaking of blame, that's another big thing Jones talks about, this idea of first do no harm. So instead of immediately jumping to punishment or criticism, you create a culture of learning, of growth.
Yeah, it's like creating that safe space for people to experiment, to take risks, to even make mistakes without feeling like they're going to get shut down or like publicly shamed.
It's huge. Fear is the death of innovation, right? And that's where this whole resourcefulness thing comes in. Jones wants us to stop focusing on limitations and instead empower ourselves and those around us to find creative solutions.
Love it. It's that whole don't tell me it can't be done, show me how we can do it attitude.
Spot on.
Yeah.
But Jones also acknowledges that real lasting change, it means facing some hard truths about ourselves and the cultures we're part of. He doesn't shy away from the shadow side of human behavior.
Okay, now this is getting interesting. What kind of shadow side are we talking about here?
Well, he gets into deception, for one.
Yeah.
And that could be anything from those little white lies we tell ourselves to straight up manipulation that can poison a whole organization. He wants us to develop this healthy skepticism without becoming cynical or paranoid,
Yeah, that's a tough balance to strike. Trusting your instincts, but also staying open to different perspectives.
Absolutely. And then there's rebellion. Like, why do people rebel, even in small ways? And how does that resistance affect progress?
Makes you wonder what we're really rebelling against, doesn't it? Is it fear? Lack of control? Feeling like nobody's listening?
All good questions. And Jones suggests a lot of times rebellion comes from unmet needs. Could be emotional, psychological, even spiritual needs that aren't being addressed.
So instead of writing someone off as difficult or rebellious, we need to try to understand what's driving that behavior.
Exactly. And finally, there's this pervasive thing Jones calls dysfunction, how it seeps into our jobs, our relationships, even our own heads. He's a big advocate for self-awareness, seeking help when we need it, breaking those negative cycles that keep us stuck.
It's that reminder that we're all works in progress, right? Nobody's got it all figured out. And there's no shame in asking for help, asking for guidance. So after this deep dive into Jones's book, what's the one thing you hope our listeners take away from it? What's that one thing they can maybe even try out in their own lives?
At its core, Jones's work is a call to action. He wants us to ask ourselves, how am I contributing to unhealthy patterns, even if I don't realize it? And what's one small step I can take today to embody these principles? Love, integrity, resourcefulness.
It's about recognizing that we all have the power to create positive change. And it starts with our own thoughts, our own actions, the way we interact with the world around us.
Exactly. Even the tiniest shift in perspective, the smallest act of kindness, it can create this ripple effect, transforming not just our own lives, but the lives of those we touch.
And we can't forget that thought-provoking question Jones leaves us with. The real fear most have is that their love will be somehow depleted if they show or give too much empathy or serve others too much. A question to ask is, who fills your cup up now? Powerful stuff. Really makes you think about where you're seeking validation and how that might be affecting your capacity for love, both giving and receiving.
Absolutely. It's a question that stays with you long after you finish the book. And honestly, that's what makes this conversation so valuable. It's not about quick fixes. It's about ongoing reflection and growth.
Well said. And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive into the journey to transform culture. Thanks for joining us, deep divers. Until next time, keep exploring, keep those questions coming, and most importantly, keep creating those positive ripples.